Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in again. We are over at one of my buddy's house. We're going to be changing the rear diff cover on his F350 here. He's got the 6.7 liter Powerstroke. Of course, you can see this thing's got a massive lift on it. If you want to see more on this truck, drop a comment below. I can go over some of the other stuff it's got done. But if you recall watching the channel, we replaced the diff cover on my truck because it was leaking. He came under his truck to double check, just take a look, and lo and behold, it's also leaking. So I don't know if these companies nowadays are just using cheap junk to seal it, but he picked up something that will solve that problem big time. So I'll show you what he got, and then we'll move on to the install. All right, so if you look at the rear diff on these trucks, the very bottom bolt on the right-hand side is actually a drain. It doesn't have a drain plug. You have your fill plug up about halfway here, but there's no drain under the actual axle itself. So your bottom right-hand bolt, you can see, will start draining it out nicely. Let it pour out for a bit, and then we'll pop that out just to get it some air. It'll start pouring out quicker. You won't be here all day. But you can see this stuff, hopefully, is very murky. Definitely time for a change, so no better time to add our Banks cover onto the truck. All right, so what we got to replace it is the big heavy duty cover from Banks. Now, not only is this thing way thicker, it'll take a lot more beating. This is what they call their ram air. So basically, if you look into the bottom, you can see the plastic through there. So when you're driving, this thing's gonna pull air into the hole because these two spots will drop below the truck. It's gonna force the air up the little splines here, cooling this, keeping the oil cooler, and making everything last longer inside. One benefit, or multiple benefits of this thing, like you see, and we pulled this plug out to drain the oil on the stock truck. Here you have your actual plug to drain the oil. So you don't have to take any bolts that are holding the cover itself onto the truck off. You can pull the plug here to do an oil change. You have a little sight glass here. They did mention that it's not to fill your oil, it's just to see the quality of the oil. So when you're filling this thing up, if you don't see anything in here or it happens to be above, don't worry about that. This is clearly just to see the quality of the oil. If it's black and gunky like it's in there right now, you know it's time to change. Then when you come to the top, you have a fill port up top here now instead of on the side like you've seen where you pulled the plug out on the bottom. And then again, with this cover, they send you new bolts for everything because it is a little bit thicker. So they send you some better quality bolts. They're a little longer to make up the thickness difference. You get a little bit of blue Loctite. One little tiny drop on each bolt is all you need. Don't overdo it. And then the nice thing is you get this rubber gasket. And it's one solid piece. It's not two pieces. It's not sliced. It's one ring. And it'll go on the back of the cover right here. And now looking at the inside of the cover, this is, like I said, the ring or the rubber gasket will go in the notch here. Now when you're putting this in, don't push and kind of slide it all around because you're going to stretch the rubber, and when you get to the other end, you're going to be left with a big loop here. It's not that it's the wrong one, it's just that you stretched it. So if anything, as you're putting it in, you want to go around and kind of push towards the part you already have in. So then when you're all the way around, it should fit perfectly. And another thing that you can look at for this cover, if you notice, got a little notch here and a little notch here on each side. Because like I said, this portion and this portion hang under the truck. That's what forces the air in, cools everything on here. If you're off and maybe you run something over or you're doing something and this hooks on anything, those two notches are going to allow this part to snap off or this part to snap off, and you're not going to rip the whole cover off the rear end of your truck. So yes, it'll hang a little bit lower, but they have the breaking points there so you don't damage anything worse than it would be. All right, so the gasket is all in, as you can see. Like I said, just press her in. Don't try to stretch it or anything weird, and it will all pop in perfect. And then it just pops up just enough, if it'll focus, to seal it on so you're not compressing a bunch of stuff in between the diff itself and the cover. So just enough up there to seal it properly. And if for some reason you break this thing, and you might have a cut in it. It's now not one loop. What I recommend, it's not the end of the world, but put the broken part at the top. All the oil, just by gravity, is going to be on the bottom. When it's spinning, yes, it may still leak a little bit being on the top, but you're better off having the brake on the top. And then if you do, or if you're having a different cover altogether and you're just watching this for install purposes, get some RTV sealant and put it around with the gasket. It's not going to hurt anything, it's just extra, and especially if you have a little nick somewhere, it's not going to end up leaking on you right away. And one last thing to note on the Banks cover is the drain plug right here on the bottom. If you look on the inside, has a little tiny magnet on there. So just like the plug we pulled off that collected all that gunk on there, when the time comes, if something was to ever get into this cover, it's going to go to the bottom and get stuck on that magnet instead of being churned through your gears with the oil. So it's a nice little add-on again. Magnet on the bottom, and then here, like I mentioned before, is the other side of the little sight glass where you can keep an eye on just the quality of the oil. All right, so under the truck, if you look at the bottom left-hand corner here, you can see exactly where it was leaking, and he actually cleaned this up just a couple days ago, and the truck hasn't been moved since, so it is still seeping out. But what we're doing is just letting it drain, pop out the little stock fill area there just to give it some airflow. Let it drain. You don't have to get it all out, but at least now when we pop the rest of these bolts off, you don't have a big waterfall of oil coming at you. So we'll let it drip. And then if you look at the fill plug right here, you can actually see, hopefully, if it'll focus, the magnet on the end did pick up a few chunks of stuff, so it was definitely time to change the oil anyways, so we can get the Banks one to replace it, and it should solve this problem, hopefully. All right, so we got the factory cover off, and as you can see, when you look like this, you can see there's a line here. That's where your oil was filled up to. It gets a little bit darker because that's where the oil is always sitting. So when you fill it, like I said on the sight tube, because this is the fill hole for the old one, you don't want to fill it all the way up. This is kind of in line with the new sight tube. So again, that's just to keep an eye on the oil that's in there. You actually only want to fill it up to that point, which works out to 3.3 to 3.5 of the oil here. What you're looking for is 75/85. So that's what Ford recommends for the rear end. And just like my truck, this thing was leaking on the bottom. If you look here, there's just a tiny little bead of silicone. There's not really much here at all. But then if you look on this side, there's actually none right on this section. There's no silicone at all. And you can see it's even starting to rust, getting the Ford rust on the bottom. So it's a good time to change it. And again, now with the gasket on the new one, you don't have to worry about the silicone, you don't have to worry about drying time, any of that. You can put it on, bolt it down, fill it up, and you're good to go. All right, so underneath the truck, this is basically what your rear end looks like inside. You want to make sure, wipe off all the excess oil. Again, that bottom right-hand bolt there is your drain. Clean it up as best as you can. Get a putty knife or a razor blade or anything and clean off all the excess silicone RTV sealant around there. Get it all off as clean as you can. And if for some reason maybe you end up gouging the face of the diff here by chance, just get some RTV sealant, put it in with the gasket. It'll make up the difference. You won't have to worry about a leak. Only other thing back here that we did is if you look up there, that little bracket on the top, there's a 10mm bolt up there. You have to take that bolt out and you can lift up the brake line there just to get at that top right-hand bolt, because of course that bracket lines up right with it when it's in place. So take the 10mm out, push it up, and then you can get the cover off. Like I said, get it all cleaned up, and then the Banks cover is ready to go on. One last thing that Banks recommends is before you put this in, just double check that this thing is tight. Not that they send it loose, but you never know, maybe through shipping, whatever the case, they may miss it once in a while. Double check that it's threaded and tight. It is a 15/16, fits right on there. Give it a little torque. Mine was tight, wasn't even able to wiggle it at all, so we're ready to put the cover on. And as for the new bolts, they are a 1/2 inch. So you got a 1/2 inch bolt. It was 13 mil to take the old ones off. We'll take their blue Loctite they sent here. Again, just one little dab on each end of the bolts. Get them all started, thread them all in by hand, make sure you're not cross-threading anything, and then you can start torquing them down. When you torque it down, they recommend 20 foot-pounds, that's all you need. And again, don't go in a circle, do it kind of like you're doing a tire. One here, one there, one there, one here, just kind of crisscross. There's no specific crisscross they want, just don't do it all next to each other and tighten it like that, otherwise you may get it warped one way or the other. Nice thing with this cover and any cover with a gasket is you don't have to worry about getting the sealant everywhere. So you got a little bit more wiggle room, a little play, a little easier for yourself, especially if you're newer to this DIY guy in your garage like we're doing. You don't have to worry about making a big mess. All right, so once you get the cover off, get yourself a little putty knife, scrape around, get all the silicone as best as you can off. Take a little bit of brake cleaner or whatever, spray on a rag and wipe it all around, get it so you're down to the metal again. Then you're ready for your new cover. And when you come up here, get your Loctite on the bolts, just a little dab on each end of each bolt. That's all you need, just like I have here. And it's just enough that's sent in this package to do like that. Then when you thread them in, it'll work itself around the bolt and it'll come all the way up. You don't want to put a whole bunch of this stuff on because in case you need to get this off for some reason at one point, you don't want to have to snap all the bolts off. That's going to be a way bigger deal than you need it to be. So a little bit of a dab just on the ends like that. You can start threading it back on. All right, so you can see we have the cover on. We'll take a better look once it's filled up, but now it's time to fill it. So the drain plug on the top is this. 14 millimeter, again, got a magnet on the end, and you have a little rubber washer in there to seal it once you crank it back down, so you don't have to worry about any leaks. And you can see on there it also says Banks to match the cover. So we'll start filling it up. 3.5 75 W80. All right, so the cover is on. You have enough room between the exhaust and the wheel and the diff itself to fill the plug or fill through the fill port on the top there, which is 14 millimeter. 3.5 quarts we put in there. Put the bolt back in. You don't have to torque it down super tight. It has the rubber washer on there, so as long as it's tight enough to squish the washer, you're good, and you don't have to worry about it puking out the top or coming loose when you're driving around and falling off. So again, the sight tube there, not necessary that you see oil through it. Once the oil spins and you're driving, that's just to see the quality of it, not necessarily the fill point. So if you like the video, like and subscribe if you want to see more on the truck, because clearly it's got more than just a Banks diff cover on it. Let me know, and maybe we'll come out and film some more on the truck.